Welcome to today's Conversation Series program, Women in Leadership. Margo Hoyt, Managing Director, Talent and Leadership Development at LHH, will be speaking with Carlene Alexander, Comptroller General and Deputy Minister at Ontario Treasury Board Secretariat. Today, Margo and Carlene are talking about what it means to be a woman in the workplace, both today and as we look to the future. We will be taking questions at the end of the conversation. Please use the Q&A function to enter your questions anytime during the session, and we'll respond to as many questions as possible. Hosting today's program is Margo Hoyt. Over to you, Margo.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Laura, for kicking us off. We're really excited about the second in our conversation series. And to get a chance to introduce you to some or to extend your knowledge of Carlene Alexander and hear from her insights and her experiences. By way of introduction, to those of you who don't know LHH, quickly, we are helping companies to see the possibilities in their people. Every organization is going through transformation now, and it's our delight to partner with those organizations to ensure that leaders are able to upskill, reskill through assessment, through coaching, other leadership development and career development programs. In addition, we can help support recruiting through executive search and our other recruitment services. And finally, as the world's leader in career transition, we're there to support you with that as well. In terms of today, I'm so pleased to introduce to you Carlene. Carlene's Ontario's first Comptroller General. It's a Deputy Minister level position in the provincial government that oversees all financial and risk management instruments and builds the capacity and community for the finance and internal audit professionals. She started in this role just in October of 2020. Carlene is a seasoned senior executive, though, in the public sector. She's worked at the municipal, the provincial, the federal, and the broader public sector. From 2009 until 2014, Carlene worked for the OPS in executive positions across various industries, including the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Indigenous Affairs, and the Para-Pan American Games Secretariat. Following that, she was with the Toronto District School Board, or TDSB. One of her key roles there was as the Associate Director of Business Operations and Service Excellence. In this role, she oversaw the board's $3.4 billion budget, all of the facilities, human resources, and other business and operational functions. Her last role at the TDSB was the Interim Director of Education, responsible for leading TDSB and executing a safe return to school plan. Carlene was the first Black woman to serve as a director at the TDSB. Carlene's a newlywed, and she's the mother of 5 children and a stepchild, and we are so delighted to have you with us today, Carlene.
Thank you very much, Margo. Really appreciate that. I'm very happy to be here.
You know, we started this series, Carlene, in celebration of International Women's Day, which is really International Women's Month or season, as a great opportunity, really, to give women some perspective, some ideas, and some inspiration, both for themselves and how they can have an impact on their organization. So you and I are going to have a conversation for about 30 minutes. I'm going to have you all to myself and all my favorite questions, but we'll quickly then turn it over to all of the questions that our viewers have. So a reminder again that viewers, as we're having this conversation, please put your questions in the Q&A tab, and we'll do our very best to get through as many of those as possible. All right, so are you ready to get started, Carlene?
I am.
Excellent. Well, let's start with the first pretty broad question. I shared some of the success and some of the roles that you've had over your career so far. Can you give us a chance to understand your story a bit? What have been some of the career milestones and turning points?
Sure. So I'll take it back to where I was born and raised. So I was born and raised in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I grew up in a neighborhood which we would now call an underserved community, which at the time I would not have considered it to be underserved because it was a great community, lots of great people, and really a sense of family. But at that time, going to university and holding executive jobs, I would say was probably not the norm for the majority of the people in the community. However, I always wanted my path to be a bit different. I had big dreams since I was a young girl, but I did have a bit of an unconventional path. And by that, I mean that I was a teenage mom. I had my first child when I was 19 and I was in university. So, not really the conventional way of doing things. And I actually ended up having 2 children before I graduated from university, but I didn't give up and I did finish on time. So I was very, very committed and dedicated to sticking to my path and realizing my dreams, regardless of the challenges and barriers that came in my way. I started my career in the banking sector after finishing university. I spent a little bit of time then in an accounting firm as well, but then I landed a job as a tax auditor with Canada Revenue Agency in Halifax. So I was on my path to being an accountant, which is something that I had my goal set on when I was in university. But I did go on to do an assignment that was in something completely different. So it wasn't anything to do with accounting. I was actually a program coordinator at an organization that worked horizontally with many different government departments on various initiatives. And it's interesting because initially I debated on whether or not I should take that opportunity because it wasn't necessarily aligned with, accounting and the path that I thought I was going down. However, it turned out to be a huge turning point in my life and my career. While I was at that organization, I was asked to make a presentation to a group that included an HR executive from the Federal Treasury Board Secretariat in Ottawa on the perspectives of youth in the public service and why their voice was important. She was very impressed with me and my presentation and asked me if I'd be willing to relocate to Ottawa to work for a Treasury Board Secretariat. And although I was very nervous because I didn't have any friends or family there, I said, absolutely, why not? I'll take that on. So I then moved to Ottawa and worked as an analyst and a senior analyst in various roles for maybe about 5 years. It was very, very interesting work. I learned so much and I learned things that I'm still applying to my work today. I then went on to be a director at about, I believe I was 29 years old, which was a bit of a big deal because it was rare to see. It was rare to see a young Black woman in such a role. Then I ended up transferring to Toronto for personal reasons. I did a transfer with the federal government as well, but then ended up moving into a job with the province. And you mentioned some of the roles that I held there, so I won't go into a lot of detail. But I worked there for about 5 years and then moved into the municipal sector as a CFO in York Region social housing company. And that was an important move for me because it gave me experience in all 3 levels of government and allowed me to have the opportunity to bring different perspectives to various conversations because I had worked in so many different types of organizations. So I was able to contribute to or able to bring perspectives on what those best practices are and how to improve things. And then I went on to work in another sector, which was the school board sector. And so I was first with Toronto Catholic District School Board as the CFO. They had a massive deficit at the time and needed to get back on track. So I came in and helped them to get through those challenges. And that success set me up nicely to take on a bigger role at the TDSB, where I was then responsible for all of the different business operations in the board, including areas that I had never ever managed before. So it was a huge learning opportunity for me. But it was, it was challenging, but I grew and learned so much. So I'll always be grateful for that role. And one of the tasks that I was assigned with towards the end of that particular assignment was I was the lead on COVID-19 when COVID-19 first came into play back in January or whenever it was. And then because I was working on the budget, because I was working on COVID-19, which were the huge priorities of the board, when my director decided to retire, I was asked to then take on the role of Director of Education. So it was a very, very challenging period. Not only was I going to be new in this Director of Education role, but the pandemic was in full force, and there were so many unknowns, no playbook to refer to. And as the country's largest school board, the country was looking to us to try to figure out what should we do. So the opportunity completely frightened me, but that's how I knew that it was the right role for me to take on, because it would involve great learning. The other interesting thing that I should mention during this particular time is that I had an 18-month-old baby. So daycares were closed, so she was at home. And I actually took a lot of Zoom calls with my baby sitting on my lap, because that was the only way for me to get through my workday. So everybody got to know my daughter, Nyla, very, very well. They got to see what she looked like. She would say hi and wave to the camera, etc. So, I did what I had to do to make things work.
Carlene, it's really clear to me that you are not afraid of anything, right? As you talk about the different steps in your career, tackling new things, bigger challenges, right up into your most recent roles. Has anyone ever looked at you and said, Carlene, why are you doing this to yourself?
Yes, several times. I've probably asked myself that same question as well. But I think that there's just something inside of me that likes challenge. I'm driven to do things that are hard, and to prove to myself that I can do it. And I live by the mantra that nothing good happens in your comfort zone. All growth happens outside of your comfort zone. And I take that very seriously. And so whenever I'm feeling a little too comfortable, and I know that it's time for me to move on and do something to make me uncomfortable and to push me and to make me grow.
Outstanding. Some of the questions last week when we started this conversation series were focused around work-life balance, which is a conversation women have been having for probably decades, but seems to be particularly relevant today. And for someone with as much as you have on your plate, what's your perspective on this topic?
Yeah, so I've been asked my perspective on this topic maybe a time or two in the past. And so the first thing that I'll start off with is that there's no magic formula, no secret sauce for this one. And it is quite individual. So, one size does not fit all. But the one thing that I've learned is that there is no such thing as a perfect balance. And when I think of the word balance, it makes me think of the word equilibrium, where you have an exact amount on each side. So 50-50 on each side. Most days in life, you will not be in 100% equilibrium. So I tend not to think about it as work-life balance, but think about it as managing my various priorities. And there may be some days where my priorities may mean that I have to put more into work. And there may be some days where I put more into my family. They may need me more. And so my goal that I have is to try to figure out how to address my priorities on any given day without letting the important things slip. And in order to do that, I need to figure out, I spend a lot of time figuring out what my non-negotiables are, both at home and at work. And that includes having conversations both with my family to determine what it is that they really, really need from me, as well as having conversations at work around, what is non-negotiable and what flexibility is available. And then that will help me to determine how I can mix things up and make everything work. And it won't be perfect. And there are going to be days where you do not achieve your goals. I've had many of those days, and it's okay. It's to be expected. We are humans. We're not machines. So we're going to slip up. And the other thing that I want to let everybody know is that mom guilt is real. You do feel that guilt, but you have to acknowledge those feelings and then move on. You'll have another chance to get your priorities right or to meet your goals tomorrow. So you can't keep dwelling on it. You just need to move on. If you have a support system, or you need to ask for help, or you need to do things to make your life easier, like, hire a cleaner, or, rely on your parents or whatever, ask for that help. I am very, very blessed that I have a supportive husband. He's very, very busy, but we do collaborate and we do make things work. I think one of the other things that I just wanted to close this question off with is that I've learned over the years to spend less time obsessing over the need for everything to be perfect. The sun will still rise in the morning, even if I don't fold that basket of clothes before I go to bed. So, you don't have to do everything, and everything doesn't have to be exactly perfect.
I think that's such wise advice. We do have a tendency to want to have every T crossed, every I dotted with perfect calligraphy, if I could add that point. And knowing that you can reset, I think, is also something that's really helpful for me to know that today I didn't make it. Tomorrow's a new day.
Exactly.
Tomorrow is a new day and we have a new chance. It's not the mistakes you make, it's how you make up for them, right?
That's right.
You mentioned your support network, and I know there must have been many supporters of you and your career along the way. Who stands out as having some of the most significant influence on your career?
So I would say the person who stands out the most and would have had, I would say, the first influence on my career is my dad. So my dad was a public servant. My dad was an HR professional, taught me a lot about how to get jobs, how to interview well, how to think about my career path. He is also very hardworking, ambitious, and focused on continuous growth and learning. I think back to when I was a kid and there were various certificates on the wall. And I always used to think, I want to be like that. I want to go on different courses. I want to get certificates for doing outstanding work, etc. So he absolutely would have been my first influence. After that, I would say that there's probably not any one person, but there are various people that influence me throughout my career. And as you've heard, I've moved around a lot and had a lot of different jobs. And I would say at every job that I've been at, there have been different people that have left something with me that I've been able to use in the future. So several different bosses, several different colleagues would have influenced me in different ways. I've had different mentors, some informal and some formal, some men, some women, like all different types of people. In general, I watch and I learn from people who I admire, and I then try to emulate those characteristics that I admire and apply them in my own life. If there is one person that I would mention, I would say that my boss at the Federal Treasury Board, I did admire her quite a bit. She taught me how to cut through a lot of fluff, get to the heart of what matters. She was very strong, no nonsense, very intelligent woman, but was also very kind and caring and compassionate and ambitious. So she is somebody who probably does stick out. But I am fortunate to have worked with many talented individuals, and like I said, they've left a little bit of themselves with me even after I've moved on.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because it's important to us both as leaders as well as individuals to remember that people are watching and people are learning and listening and taking great lessons from being able to work alongside, or if you're fortunate enough to have some kind of a mentoring, sponsorship, or coaching relationship. Yes. And you've been very fortunate, it sounds like, to have such a strong female role model early in your career to fuel your desire and that ambition that you had on your own, but to be able to have that kind of a role model, really exceptional, underscores what we know is so important.
Yes.
I know that not only being a woman, but being a woman of color has likely had an influence on who you are as a leader and on your journey and on your career. Yeah. Can you talk a bit about how that's been for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the intersectionality of both being Black and being a woman presents lots of challenges and lots of barriers, and certainly has over the years, but it also serves as motivation for me to be the very best that I can. I know that there may be times where I'm in different organizations that people don't necessarily think that I can achieve some of the things that I do, and that gives me drive, that gives me fuel and motivation to prove them wrong. I think, you know, the other thing that has shaped me as a leader, given my background, is that I do come from humble beginnings. I've probably had to work harder than the average person in order to reach my goal, because I was not born of privilege. Things didn't necessarily come easy to me and weren't handed to me. And so I don't then take people or things for granted. I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunities that I have. And that makes me take a genuine interest in the growth of the people on my team that I have now. Right now, I have an amazing team, and I've had really great teams in the past as well. And you know, their well-being is very, very important to me. I think the other thing, you know, given my background, is that I do have respect for all people, regardless of their rank or status in the organization. And I've had people tell me, you know, that that they were really touched that I took time to speak to them, to listen to them, etc., regardless of, you know, whether they were a caretaker at TDSB or whether or not they were an executive at TDSB, for example. So, you know, it doesn't matter who they are. They all deserve respect, because we all have a role to play in the organizations that we are in, and we are all leaders in our own rights. I believe that I am also very empathetic and compassionate. I know what it's like to be judged unfairly, and I tend not to do that to others. I will tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. I also have a very strong sense of integrity, fairness, and equity. It has a very personal meaning for me, and I will fight for what's right. Michelle Obama says that if you're afraid to use your voice, then you need to give up your seat at the table. And I take this quote to heart, and I will use my voice every opportunity that I get, because I'm not trying to give up my seat at the table. I like my seat. So I also give opportunities to those who may not have otherwise gotten them. So I use the saying, you know, lift as I climb. So as a leader, my job is to create more leaders. And I think that I have a soft spot for those leaders who have been marginal, or those potential leaders who have been marginalized and have potential to be leaders. I feel that I have a responsibility to help them to achieve their goals, because there may be others who would not have given them a chance.
I really love that expression, lift as you climb, and it applies in so many ways, but certainly for the community that you represent, for Black women out there who are looking and aspiring to do what you've done, to pull the chair out beside you at the table and to make room for them is really something. And clearly you haven't taken for granted what you've achieved, but you're using that as a platform to help others to achieve their dreams as well. That's really inspirational. Thank you. So much is being said about what individuals can do, and I do want to get your wisdom from a one-on-one perspective, but organizations play an incredibly important role in addition to making sure that those chairs are pulled out for all different types of people, to make sure that there are diverse people at the table and that they feel like they belong and can speak up. What is it that organizations should be paying most attention to, or what can they do to really attract women of color to strive to be in leadership roles?
Yeah, so I think that organizations really need to be seen as being inclusive organizations that value and respect women and underrepresented groups. So they have to have a reputation for being that type of organization that women and underrepresented groups want to go to and want to work in. And so it can't just be talk. There needs to be the actions to back it up and to prove it. I think that organizations who really want to have these type of values, they need to offer flexible work arrangements to allow women to manage those various priorities that they may have. And there should be women in key leadership positions in order to attract women. So nothing speaks to an organization valuing women like having women in those key seats. So it's much more believable that the organization will support and value women if you see them there. I think that having resource groups and networks set up is also important, especially if there's not if there are not substantial amounts of women or people of color in the organization, because there needs to be that support system. And not just about recruitment. Retention is also extremely important. You have to listen to women's voices, determine if there are any issues in the organization that need to be addressed, and if so, you need to make those changes. You need to listen. So women's voices need to be truly heard and truly respected. And I think that as organizations continue to demonstrate this, it will attract more women to that organization in the future.
It's interesting listening, right? It sounds so easy. We've been hearing for a long time, but listening to the women in your organization, understanding what's important for them, not only to want to join, but to stay. Really, really, sounds simple, but that's a very powerful concept, right? And demonstrating that flexibility, which has clearly been instrumental in you being able to tackle the challenges that you've taken, and to be able to succeed at those, to have the flexibility. Doesn't matter whether you're doing the job from 9 to 5 or 5 to 9, whatever it is, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's fascinating that, organizations, it can be complex, but it can also be quite simple, right?
Yep.
Sometimes we overcomplicate things.
Definitely.
To organizations that are just starting to see equity as being important or trying to level up, you mentioned a number of different things, but is there one thing or are there two things that you have seen really make the most impact?
Yeah, so I think that the tone absolutely needs to be set at the top in terms of what type of an organization you're trying to create. And then I think that organizations need to take a really hard look at their hiring and promotion practices to determine whether or not there are systemic barriers that are in place that are preventing women or marginalized groups from reaching their potential. And then they need to determine how to remove those barriers. So for example, some job postings have non-essential requirements. Even though they may be listed as essential, they're truly not essential. So they may be posing barriers. So I think that organizations need to look at competency-based assessments and should focus on transferable skills, not necessarily the experience that one may have had, because there may be very talented individuals who have not been provided with opportunities in the past. I think that HR professionals need to be trained in anti-racism, equity, diversity, and inclusion as well. Hiring panels should be diverse, and what gets measured gets done. So there should be performance measures and targets in place to make sure that staff at all levels reach parity with the workforce, with the labor force. And senior management should be held accountable if that's not happening. And I think that if there are women who could be candidates that were previously not provided with certain opportunities to help them prepare for those roles, organizations need to put in place accelerated development programs or whatever support programs are needed to help them to get ready to take on those challenges. And then finally, and I talked about it a bit, but I'll just make the point one more time because it is so important. There needs to be a truly inclusive environment where diversity of thoughts and perspectives is not only welcomed, but it's necessary and it's critical. And so I'll go back to the saying where, if two of us think the same, one of us is redundant. So I think that organizations really need to take that piece of advice to heart and truly welcome different thoughts.
Well said. Very nice. We're going to do the final question now, my final question, and then we're going to go to the Q&A. So viewers, I know you've got a million questions on your mind. Please get them into the Q&A section. We'll go there next. But we certainly are in unprecedented times, dare I say, as many others have. When you're mentoring women today, in the context that we have in March 2021, what advice are you giving?
So I would say that I have 3 key pieces of advice that I give to my mentees. And some of this advice I was just giving to one of my mentees yesterday. So 1, self-care. 2, take risks. 3, own your career. So I'll talk just briefly about each one. So on the topic of self-care, I think that COVID gave us a pause and taught us to think about what is truly important, and taking care of ourselves, I think, is more critical than ever right now. And one of the things that I would say that I've recently discovered, and I've now been, preaching it to my team and my mentees, et cetera, is that there are different types of rest and rejuvenation and restoration that are required for us to be our best selves. So you may need physical rest, mental rest, spiritual rest, social rest, et cetera. We need it all types. And so one of the things that really resonated with me from an article that I read is that you can't pour from an empty cup. So you need to restore yourself on a constant basis in order for you to be able to give to others. And so the other really important point that I've learned over the last little while is that success is more than just career achievements. It's a compilation of different things. It's good health, it's internal joy, it's continuous growth and development, etc. So you can't just focus on the grind all of the time. You have to look at what does success mean to you, and what's truly going to make you happy. You need to spend some time doing some reflection in order to be your best self, and stay optimistic, because that is the key to resilience. Focus on progress and not just perfection. When it comes to taking risks, I think, having a growth mindset is one of the keys to success. And like I said earlier, all growth happens outside of your comfort zone. So challenge yourself, take on new roles, new projects, new challenges. Especially when it scares you. If it scares you, then do it. This enriches your competencies, your skills, experiences, and it opens doors in the future. And then when it comes to owning your career, don't be a passive participant in your career. Determine where you want to go, what experiences you want to get, and then take the steps to make it happen. Don't wait for somebody to offer it to you. Don't wait for somebody to tap you on the shoulder. If you want something, you go get it. Network with key individuals, seek out different learning opportunities, seek feedback from others on your areas of strength and your areas for development, and spend a lot of time self-reflecting. And one last thought, believe in yourself wholeheartedly. On the back of my iPad, I have a quote by R.S. Gray that is engraved, which says, "She believed she could, so she did." And I believe that this should be a mantra for all of us.
Love that. That's absolutely true. There is so much in there. I'd love to ask, again, a million follow-up questions, but let me start with a question, Carlene, that came in advance.
Sure.
And so for the person who sent this in advance, thank you very much for getting us kicked off. As a female leader, what has been the most significant barrier in your career?
So I would start off with perhaps the most significant barrier would have been my own internal barriers. And that is, what we hear about a lot these days, called the imposter syndrome. So I think that this was more of an issue as I was as I was younger, and as I've been older, I've been learning to deal with that. So sometimes as women, especially a racialized woman, you may feel that you don't belong at the table. You may feel that your voice is not as important as somebody else's. And so it took me a while to realize that my voice matters. I do belong there. And I'm going to show that I belong there. So I think that is one significant barrier that as a woman, we need to get over. I think that there are also barriers related to expectations and assumptions that are put into place around what you as a woman care about, or what you as a woman can handle. So there could be some barriers in terms of people may think that you don't want to move up in your career because you have a young family, for example, and so you may not be provided with certain opportunities. So again, this is where I say you need to own your own career, and you need to fight for those opportunities so that you can get to where you're trying to go. On the flip side, there may be barriers where there are meetings or expectations or things that are happening at very awkward times that you may not be able to manage as you are managing your various priorities in life. So, in those situations, I say that you do need to have the conversations with your employer to determine how you can make things work. I think that you do need to explain that you're very committed to the organization, but you're also committed to your responsibilities that you have outside of the organization, and you want to try to find a way to make it work. Not all organizations will be flexible, and you may need to find another employer, but I think that the first step is to have those conversations to determine how you can make things work with your situation.
I love how you balance. It's not about not performing or not being committed or not doing your work. It's about really asking for the flexibility to do the work when you can do it around all of your responsibilities, right? It's about being clear about when and how you can do it, not trying to get away with not doing it, right? It's
That's right.
Performance and flexibility.
Exactly. And I would say that, one of the silver linings of COVID is that it has shown many employers that there are alternate ways to doing your work rather than being in the office, during set hours. You can do your work at night. You can do your work early in the morning, or however it can fit into your schedule. I think what is most important, as you say, is that the work gets done, and how and when the work gets done, that's where flexibility should be able to come into play.
It's really interesting to me too, the focus on your career and managing your own career. And the research has shown is that, women are not necessarily as good about lifting their head and stating what their career aspirations are, that men are always looking for the next role or two roles down. And again, gender stereotypes, but research based. So the idea that, don't put your head down and just do good work, waiting for someone to pluck you and promote you, but to have an idea about where you want to take your career and how to best set yourself up for that journey.
Absolutely. And Margo, like, I've heard conversations in the past where assumptions were made where, somebody would say, she's really, really good, but I don't think that she wants to take on that challenge in this particular point in her life because, she has young children, etc. And then I would always challenge and push back and say, but did you have the conversation with her? Is this something that she has said? So, I think that as senior management, we also have to be mindful of our assumptions that come along with people in different parts of or different stages in their life. And we have to challenge ourselves and others when we hear those types of assumptions being made.
Terrific. And for those of you who are maybe the minority, but the men on the call, or as you say, other senior managers, remember that. Here's the first question that came in, Carlene, today live. As a young Black woman, how did you navigate the workplace relationships, especially those with your direct reports? I've recently accepted a position as a controller and have to manage a team of people who are older, but less experienced. This is starting to take a toll on me as my actions are always questioned and my supervisor did not empower me enough to exercise my leadership properly.
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's a scenario that has played out in my life a few different times. So I think that going into various roles in the past where I have been a young Black woman, generally I have been younger than my staff. That's not so much the case anymore because now I'm getting old. But in the past, I was generally younger than my staff. And so there would always be this constant need for me to prove myself. And I don't think that necessarily would have happened had I been white, had I been a man, had I been older, like I had all sorts of different things going against me. And unfortunately, it does take a toll. But, I just plowed through. I was steadfast, and I just kept showing why I deserved to be there, and built relationships with those individuals. So, make sure to not come in too heavy-handed, not to need to prove your point to the point where you are going to be damaging relationships. So you need to stay strong in your resolve to prove why you're there. But at the same time, you need to build those collaborative relationships and build the trust. So you can't take a heavy hand. So you do have to have a balance of building relationships, but yet still, standing your ground and showing why you are there. And, eventually for me, it generally does work out, but it is very tiring. And I think that eventually we will get to a spot where this won't be the case, that people will realize, as more of us get into leadership positions, I think that there will be a recognition that we do belong at that table, that we do have something valuable to bring, but it is a culture change that I think will take some time, but stick to it and you'll get through.
That's where that building that confidence and that resilience is really at the core. Related to that is a question here that came in. What advice do you give to women and underrepresented groups who, when they share a diversity of thought, get a microaggression type of response, or questioning or minimizing that thought?
Yeah, that is a very common scenario as well. And again, it's one of those things that takes a toll on us as people, as leaders, as women, as racialized people. However, we have to stick to it. It does take time and it does take work in order to change culture. So I think that we should call things out when we see them. And I also think that our allies need to also step up and be able to call some things out, especially those microaggressions. So to question, well, can we have a further conversation about that? Can I probe that a little bit to determine, why it is that you feel this way, etc. So I think the more we call it out, the more we are going to challenge the thinking, and the more we are going to change things. There is, I think, it does require a lot of resilience. It does require a lot of strength. But nobody ever said that change is going to be easy. So I think that, you just have to stick through it, and you need to develop those relationships with allies who will have your back and who will participate and amplify your voice when it comes to those situations.
And that's when you look to everyone around the table, isn't it? To ask those powerful questions. Where does that come from? Tell me more about why you have these questions, or can we consider it from a different perspective? That anybody can ask those questions. And I think, your call on the allies, your call on others around the table to be participating in that. So the weight is not all on one person's shoulders is really important.
Exactly. And if I could just maybe say one more thing, and that's like, don't give up. So when people will question your diversity of thought and come with a microaggression, part of the reason is to discourage you and to have you give up and to buy into the group think. And that's exactly what you don't want to do. That's what they may want you to do, but that's not going to help. That is just going to perpetuate the situation. So don't stop. Keep on.
Keep your seat at the table.
That's right.
Can you share any bibliography that helped you advance your career as a woman or as a Black woman?
So that's an interesting question. So I would probably have to think about that. And maybe what I can do is I can post something in LinkedIn in terms of what particular books, because, thinking of all of them off of the top of my head right now is probably, I would probably miss something important. So I will make a commitment to post something.
Carlene generously offered before we started this conversation that if we don't get to all your questions or something comes to you after we've shut this down, to reach out to her on LinkedIn. And she's very open and will be scanning and looking for opportunities to connect with you individually if you have other questions. So thank you for that, Carlene. And absolutely. I'm sure that there will be more than one person to take you up on that. In terms of some compliments, there's a very lovely shout out to you here. Shout out to Carlene for being a powerful role model. Her life experiences are admirable. Her presence is powerful, and she gracefully shares those who supported her while extending a hand for those who are presenting herself in a professional manner. And that was from Brenda and Rossum. So thank you, Brenda. I don't know if you know Brenda or not, Carlene.
Thank you, Brenda.
You've gained another fan today. We've talked a lot about internal barriers. So this question is quite interesting. What's the biggest external barrier you've encountered in the workplace? And how did you deal with that?
Yeah. I just need a moment to think about the biggest external barrier in the workplace. So I would say that it goes back to the question that somebody posed a few questions ago, where it was that, you know, you're constantly being questioned by staff. Sometimes it would also be by colleagues. I do have to say that I have been fairly lucky in that my bosses have been very supportive in the past. So I don't feel that I had necessarily barriers from that perspective, but I would say certainly colleagues and at times staff in different organizations may have tried to undermine my authority and make it appear as if I did not belong. So I would say, that could have been a barrier to success had I not handled it in a way where, I let it roll off of my back and I kept my eye focused on the goal that I was trying to achieve. It was difficult and it happened more than once in more than one workplace. But I believe that it just built my resilience as a leader, as a person, and it built my strength. So I did not let that get in my way in terms of, where I was trying to go in my career.
You have such incredible ambition and drive. It strikes me that a little negativity isn't going to get in your way of achieving what you have your focus on.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'll just mention is that, I have been quite fortunate in terms of being able to land the jobs that I was most interested in. But there have been situations where I didn't get certain jobs, and it may have been related to me being a woman, me being a Black woman, all sorts of different things. But again, don't let that stop me. I'm just going to keep trying and I'm going to go for the next one and come back even harder. So, if I see a barrier, I'm either going to jump over it, go under it, go around it, break it down, do whatever I have to do, but I'm not going to let the barrier stand in my way.
Terrific. One of the questions that came in is a real reflective question, Carlene. I don't know if you've given this thought before, but if you were to do it over again so far, is there anything that you would have done differently?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I have given some thought to that. And you're probably going to laugh because, you say I've taken lots of risks and lots of chances, but I would probably say I would have taken even more. So even though I have moved around a lot and gone into different roles and different organizations, I, in my mind, have played it relatively safe in that I've stayed in the public sector or the broader public sector. I think if I were to do it all over again, I probably would have taken more chances to go to an organization that was even more different. So, go to the public sector in the midst of my career to do something completely different. And then maybe come back to the public sector because, my heart truly is in the public sector and I don't regret being in the public sector. But I do sometimes feel like I've missed out on some of that private sector experience. Although I had it in the beginning of my career, I didn't have it, either mid or later on in my career. So that is probably one of the things that I would have done differently.
So I happen to know your appointment is for 3 years, I think. So let's schedule a date in about 3 years from now to see if in fact that has influenced your next steps.
Yeah.
One of the things that we have all been dealing with is being so distributed in terms of where we're working and not being in the office. How do you think we can best create a culture of inclusion when we're not in the same space?
Yeah, so that is certainly a challenge, especially, when you are starting a new job in an organization and you haven't actually met the people before. So, that was my circumstance. I started my new job in October, hadn't met the team before. I knew a couple of people in the past, but it is quite challenging. I had an ADM who started in the midst of the pandemic as well, and again, didn't know anybody. So what we do try to do on our team is make some time for some social interaction. So we do have a regularly scheduled Office of the Comptroller General social that is created. We play games, we just have conversations, no work topics are allowed. So it allows us to get to know each other a little bit better. We also make sure to have conversations around, how's everybody feeling? Let's do a check-in. What's going on in your life? What's new? Is there anything that you need to share, etc.? And we have a lot of conversations around our organizational culture and inclusivity, and try to figure out, is there something that we need to do better? Should we all have our cameras on? Does that make it better, or do people need their cameras off? So we have conversations in my team to try to make sure that people feel as comfortable and as included as possible, and we make adjustments if need be. And the other thing that we have done is we've created a document which we call the User Guide to Me. And in this User Guide to Me, it gives folks insight into your preferences. What times may you not be available during the day because you have to, go for a daycare run and pick up your daughter from daycare? When do you do your best work? When do you like to receive your first emails in the morning? When do you want to stop receiving them at night? What things make you happy? What things, make you frustrated, etc. And it's given us an incredible insight into each other and helps us to work better together.
I love that, because not only is it making it easier for others to understand how to work with me, for instance, but it's also making me really pause and reflect in such an unusual time. What do I really need to be at my best? And I'm not sure that everyone's taking the time to check in on themselves and figure that out on a regular basis. I really love that idea. I can visualize a number of our viewers writing that one down right now. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Here's an interesting one from an anonymous attendee. Do you think it's okay to show emotion in the workplace?
That is a very interesting question. And so what I would say to that one is that my mode of operating had always been generally that I show little emotion other than happiness. But, I tend to be quite reserved in my way of doing things. And, I don't think that I've ever, in all of my years of being a leader, I don't think that I've ever yelled at anybody or raised my voice. I have been disappointed, I've been frustrated, but I don't think I've ever raised my voice. So, my way of operating generally does not show a lot of emotion. However, I have realized in doing some self-reflection and in, having different coaching conversations, etc., that sometimes, showing a little bit more emotion may be okay because it shows that vulnerable side of us. And so I think that showing some emotion is okay, but I do think that we have to keep it in check a little bit because we do have to be mindful about how we're making others feel, right? And so there's 3 questions that they say that you should ask whenever you're going to say something. Is it true? Is it necessary? And is it kind? And so for me, kindness, empathy, and compassion is really, really important. And so, I want to make sure that I am containing whatever negative emotions I might feel at a particular time when I'm frustrated, so that I don't cross certain lines that you can't come back from. Um, so, I think that emotion is okay, but it does have to be controlled, and it does have to stay within a certain level of professionalism and not cross certain lines. But
Yeah.
I do very much believe in vulnerability. And, one of the things that I do with my staff, and I've always done, is that I will never profess to be the smartest person in the room. And so I will state when I don't know something. When I need more information, when I'm not so good at something, I'm not afraid to share that.
Those are really important traits we've heard, especially through this pandemic, where it's impossible for anybody to say, I know what to do right now,
Yeah.
right? There are just times when we really haven't had a clue, and to be honest about that, and to look for people to collectively come up with the answers, and to show that, this is impacting everybody. So, that vulnerable side of who you are, that's another kind of role model that I think we've learned has been really important for leaders to demonstrate. Thanks for sharing that. The last question, Carlene, will really go to you in terms of saying, we've had such a wonderful conversation. Thank you. We have to wrap things up. Are there any final words of wisdom that you have for our viewers as we get ready to sign off?
Yeah, so I would just say, so first of all, thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much to everybody who signed on to hear what it is that I have to say. And so just a couple of last words. One, don't feel like you need to fit in. And in fact, you should be trying to be bold and to stand out. You don't have to be like everybody else. You should not be like everybody else. You are uniquely you, and continue to be that way. And you would have heard this theme throughout my answers. Take chances. Don't always play it safe. There is one last quote by Aaron Hansen that I wanted to leave everybody with. I feel that it is very powerful, and I think about it whenever I need to take a chance. So it goes like this. There is freedom waiting for you on the breezes of the sky. And you ask, what if I fall? Oh, my darling, but what if you fly? Thank you very much.
Oh, that is so lovely, and an inspirational point on a very inspirational conversation, Carlene. If you can tackle everything that you've tackled, raising a beautiful family, 5 children and a stepchild, pursuing all of your professional dreams and aspirations and achieving them, then we can tackle some more things as well. I'm taking away, we must prioritize, we must be bold, and we must think ahead. But there are many lessons that you've shared with us. So thank you again for your time. Thank you to all the viewers who've tuned in today. This is the second of our conversation series. The third one is coming up just next week. Please register and join us then again. Take care and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.